These are real facts from the codices and the campaign books and the Black Library novels and the designer's notes and the 10,000 years of accumulated detail that makes the setting what it is. Some of these facts are widely known among those who study the setting. Some of them are buried in footnotes and appendices and the kind of supplementary material that only the most dedicated readers reach. All of them are true. They are also, by any reasonable standard, deeply unsettling. Let us begin. The Emperor of Mankind sits on a machine called the Golden Throne in the heart of the Imperial Palace on Holy Terra, and he has been sitting on it for 10,000 years. This fact is known. What is less widely understood outside the inner circles of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and the Adeptus Custodes and the relevant inquisitorial orders is the specific arithmetic of what keeping him there requires. 1,000 psykers are consumed by the Golden Throne every single day, not every month, every day. 1,000 human beings with psychic potential, collected from across the Imperium by the black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, processed through the facilities on Holy Terra, and fed to the machine that sustains the Emperor's presence in the warp and keeps the Astronomican burning. The Astronomican is the psychic lighthouse that guides Imperial ships through the warp, and without which warp navigation across most of the Imperium would become essentially impossible. The throne requires this feeding to sustain it. The feeding requires 1,000 people per day. 1,000 per day across 10,000 years is, in total, 365,000 per year, which across 10,000 years becomes 3.5 billion human beings, the entire current population of a medium-sized sector of the Imperium, consumed in the maintenance of a single machine over the course of the age in which the Imperium currently exists. This number does not include the psykers consumed before the throne was occupied, in the earlier periods of the Emperor's psychic work. It is only the toll since he was interred following the Horus heresy. The people fed to the throne are not always willing. This is recorded in the operational documents of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, with the specific neutrality of institutional language that has been describing the same process for so long that the language itself has become insulated from the weight of what it describes. The candidates arrive at the throne complex in groups. Some have been told what awaits them and have made their peace with it in various ways. Some have not been told explicitly and understand only that their purpose is to serve the Emperor and that this service takes the form it takes. Some resist, and the records note this possibility with the same neutral tone they apply to everything else. And the records do not specify what happens when resistance occurs, because the records do not need to specify it, because the outcome is not in question. The Emperor is aware of them. This is perhaps the most disturbing element of the fact, the element that the custodians who have served in proximity to the throne for centuries discuss only among themselves in terms that the official documentation does not capture. The Emperor's consciousness, vast and diffuse, and spread across the warp in ways that make the word consciousness barely adequate to describe what it refers to, perceives the souls that are fed to the throne as they are consumed. He does not have the capacity to stop the process. He does not have the capacity to express anything about the process in any communication that the people around the throne can receive. He is, in this, as in everything else during the 10,000 years of his entombment, aware and unable to act, present and unable to speak, sustaining the Imperium at a cost that he cannot refuse and cannot acknowledge. The Golden Throne itself is broken. This is a fact that the highest levels of the Adeptus Mechanicus have known for centuries, and that has been assessed repeatedly as technically unfixable given the current state of Imperial technological knowledge. The throne was designed and built during the Dark Age of technology, before the knowledge of that age was lost, and the specifications required to repair it properly are knowledge that does not currently exist in any accessible archive in the Imperium. The machine is functional, maintaining the Emperor at a level sufficient to sustain his psychic presence and the Astronomican. It is not functioning at the level it was designed to function at, and the efficiency loss of a broken machine means that the 1,000 per day toll may be higher than it would be if the machine were operating correctly. That more people are consumed to achieve the same output because the process of consumption is less efficient than the original designers intended. The Mechanicus Magi who have assessed the throne's condition most recently in the current period describe its state with the specific, careful language of people who understand that they are describing the central life support system of the entity that the Imperium treats as a god, and who understand that the implications of what they are describing are not something that the institutional framework around them is prepared to address. They describe the throne as continuing to function. They note that its condition has not materially worsened within the period of their most recent assessments. They do not describe a timeline for failure, because describing a timeline for failure would require acknowledging that failure is a possibility, and acknowledging that failure is a possibility would initiate a chain of institutional responses that the Magi do not have the political capital to manage. The throne will eventually fail. Every machine fails if it is not repaired and it is not properly maintained, and it continues to operate beyond its design parameters. The throne has been operating beyond its design parameters for 10,000 years. The people most qualified to assess its condition describe it as continuing to function while noting that it is broken. These two facts exist in the same records and are not reconciled because reconciling them would require the Imperium to confront a question it does not have an answer to, which is what happens to humanity when the machine that sustains the Emperor's psychic presence finally stops. The answer to that question, in the opinion of the scholars and theologians and inquisitors who have considered it in the sealed archives where such consideration is permitted, is that the Astronomican goes dark, and the fleets in the warp lose their navigation reference, and the communication network that connects the Imperium across its million worlds begins to fail, and the military forces that the Imperium depends on to hold back the various existential threats pressing against it from every direction are unable to coordinate or reinforce or supply themselves at the scale required, and the Imperium begins to fragment. How quickly this fragmentation proceeds and what remains at the end of it are questions that the models produce very wide ranges of answers to, because the variables are too many and too large to model with confidence. 1,000 per day, for 10,000 years, and the machine is broken. The black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica are the fleet that collects psykers from across the Imperium and brings them to Holy Terror for assessment, training, binding, and in the majority of cases, feeding to the Golden Throne. They travel regular routes across the Imperium, stopping at designated collection points on worlds throughout their assigned regions, receiving the psykers that local authorities have detained for collection and transporting them in the holds that the ships are specifically designed to contain. The holds of the black ships are designed to contain psykers. This requires specific engineering. A hold full of psykers, even heavily suppressed psykers, even psykers in null field restraints, generates a psychic pressure that affects the ship's crew and the ship's systems in ways that ordinary cargo does not. The crew of a black ship are selected for their psychological stability under these conditions, and they are rotated regularly because even the most stable psyche degrades with extended exposure to the specific ambient quality of several hundred frightened psykers in close proximity in a sealed environment. The ships themselves are lined with psychically inert materials and maintained by tech marines who have been trained in the specific liturgies appropriate to vessels whose primary function involves the management of psychic passengers. The psykers in the holds know, in most cases, that they are going to Terra. They know this in the way that anyone knows a destination when they have been placed on a transport heading toward it without being given a meaningful choice about boarding. What they know about what awaits them on Terra varies enormously based on what information was available to them before collection and what the collection officers told them during the process. Some know the full truth, most know fragments. The fragments are sufficient to generate in the holds of the black ships a quality of collective dread that the ship's crew describe in the informal accounts that circulate among people who have done this work for long enough to be honest about it, as the primary occupational hazard of their service, not the physical danger or the psychic exposure, but the specific experience of spending weeks or months in proximity to several hundred people who know, to varying degrees of completeness, what is waiting for them. The null field restraints that the psykers wear are not merely practical devices. They are designed with a specific secondary function that the Adeptus Astra Telepathica's technical documentation describes in the supplementary appendices that are not part of the main crew briefing materials. The restraints do not simply suppress psychic activity. They also, through a mechanism that the documentation describes in terms that require significant mechanicus education to fully decode, but that amounts to a form of psychic sedation, reduce the emotional intensity of the wearer's psychological state, not eliminate it. The technology does not permit elimination, but reduce it from the peaks that acute fear and despair would otherwise reach to something that is merely pervasive and persistent rather than acute. This reduction serves multiple purposes. It makes the holds manageable for the crew. It makes the psykers themselves less likely to produce involuntary manifestations that could endanger the ship. And it makes the journey bearable in a way that it would not be if the people in the holds were permitted to feel the full weight of what they were feeling without mitigation. The sedation is not complete, and the fear is not gone, and the holds of the black ships are still, even with all of the engineering and all of the restraints and all of the management that the Adeptus Astra Telepathica brings to the process, places of considerable human suffering. This is documented, it is accepted, the Imperium has done the calculation, and the calculation comes out on the side of the process continuing, because the process is what keeps the Astronomican burning, and the Astronomican is what keeps the Imperium functional. And the Imperium's functionality is what keeps most of the people in those holds' families alive on the worlds they were collected from. The calculation is defensible. It is also the kind of calculation that the people inside the hold are not in a position to find comfort in. The Tyranid Hive Mind is a collective consciousness that spans intergalactic distances, not interstellar, intergalactic. The Tyranid Hive fleets that are currently approaching the Milky Way galaxy from the intergalactic void are extensions of a hive mind that originated and developed in a different galaxy, or possibly in the void between galaxies, and the consciousness that directs them is in some sense still connected to whatever remains of its original location, while also directing the invasive tendrils of its fleet through the space of the Milky Way. The distances involved make the communication mechanisms that sustain this connection something that the Adeptus Mechanicus's xenobiologists have been unable to model with any confidence, because the physics of consciousness at intergalactic distances are not something that the Imperium's understanding of physics or consciousness adequately addresses. What this means practically is that the hive mind is not contained within the galaxy. When the Imperium defeats a hive fleet, it is defeating an extension of the hive mind, a portion of its attention and its resources directed at a specific invasion vector. The hive mind itself is not damaged by this defeat in the way that a commander who loses an army is damaged. It learns. The information gathered by every organism that died in the defeated fleet's invasion is available to the hive mind as tactical data, because every Tyranid organism is a receptor for the hive mind's will and also a transmitter of sensory and experiential data back to it. And the data transmitted by millions of organisms dying in every conceivable way during the course of an invasion constitutes a comprehensive study of the Imperium's military capabilities and tactical responses that the hive mind incorporates into its planning for the next fleet. The next fleet will be better. This is the central disturbing fact about the Tyranids, and it is the fact that the Ordo Xenos' strategic assessment of the Tyranid threat returns to in every iteration of its analysis. The hive mind adapts at the evolutionary level. It does not wait for natural evolutionary processes to produce adaptations in its organisms. It directs the biological engineering of its organism types in response to encountered threats with a speed that natural evolution cannot approach. a weapon system that the Imperial Guard uses effectively against a Tyranid organism type in one engagement may find that the organism type it was effective against no longer exists in the next engagement, replaced by a variant that addresses the specific vulnerability the weapon exploited. The Hive fleets that have reached the Milky Way so far are not the main body of the Tyranid race. This is a fact that the Ordo Xenos repeats in its assessments, and that the wider Imperial command structure finds very difficult to functionally incorporate into its planning, because the implications of it are not manageable at the scale of the Imperial institutions that would need to manage them. The fleets that have attacked the Imperium, Behemoth and Kraken and Leviathan and the others, are understood to be advanced tendrils, the vanguard elements of a much larger migration that is still in the intergalactic void. The main body of what is coming has not yet arrived. The main body of what is coming makes the existing Hive fleets look like the scouts they are. The biomass consumption is the other central disturbing fact. The Tyranids do not simply kill the organisms on the worlds they invade, they consume them. Every organism, every ecosystem, every cubic meter of ocean and atmosphere that contains biological material is processed by the Tyranid digestion pools that the swarm establishes on the surface of stripped worlds, converted into the biological raw material that the Hive ships use to breed more organisms and to sustain the fleet in the void. A Tyranid stripped world is not a dead world in the way that a bombed world is a dead world. It is a consumed world, a world that has been physically reduced in mass by the extraction of its biomass, its surface a sterile, lifeless rock from which even the microbial life has been removed. The records of Tyranid stripped worlds show atmospheric composition changes that indicate the removal of the oxygen produced by photosynthetic life, the flattening of the electromagnetic signatures that biological systems produce, and in some cases, actual measurable mass reduction as the Hive ships process and absorb the biomass of entire ocean systems. The Tyranid organism called the Genestealer is the Hive Mind's advanced infiltration unit, and its life cycle is one of the more specifically disturbing biological designs in the Tyranid arsenal. A Genestealer infects a host organism through a specific gland that introduces Tyranid genetic material into the host's genome. The infected host is not physically harmed by this infection in any way that would be externally visible. The infection produces in the host a specific psychological state that the xenobiologists describe as a compulsion, a deep and irresistible drive toward the protection of the Genestealer and toward the propagation of the infection through reproduction. The host's children will carry the Tyranid genetic material in more concentrated form, and those children's children will carry it in still more concentrated form, and across several generations the Genestealer cult that develops from a single infection becomes a community of organisms that are physiologically indistinguishable from their uninfected neighbors in daily life, but that will, when the Hive fleet enters the system, collectively rise and begin the work of preparing the world for conquest from within. The hosts of early generation Genestealer infection do not know they are infected. This is the specific design of the process. The psychological compulsion they experience manifests not as something alien, but as something that feels entirely their own, a devotion and a loyalty and a sense of belonging that is generated by the infection, but that is not experienced as generated by anything external. They believe in their cult, they love their children, they protect their community. They are, from the inside of the experience, simply people with unusually strong communal bonds and unusually intense religious convictions. And the religious convictions are sincere because the infection that produced them does not distinguish between sincere and induced in its outputs, producing genuine feeling rather than performed behavior. The Dark Eldar live in a city that exists inside the warp, not adjacent to the warp, not in a region of space close to a warp rift. Inside it. Commorragh, the Dark City, is a pocket dimension within the Imperium that the Eldar of the fallen Eldar Empire established using the Webway, the network of tunnels through the warp that the Eldar built during their civilization's height, and that allowed safe travel through the Imperium without the exposure to its native environment that ordinary warp travel entails. Commorragh sits in a node of the Webway where multiple routes intersect, expanded over millennia from a way station into a city of extraordinary scale by the specific population that chose it as their home, and it is maintained by the Webway itself as a bubble of stability within the Imperium. The Dark Eldar live there because they are dying. Not quickly, not from any disease or physical deterioration. They are dying because the Chaos God Slaanesh, born from the psychic excess of the original Eldar civilization's fall, claims the souls of all Eldar at the moment of their death, and the claim is not metaphorical, but literal. The psychic pull of Slaanesh on an Eldar soul at the moment of death so strong that it is not possible for an Eldar soul to persist after death in the way that other species' souls sometimes do. Every Eldar who dies is immediately taken by Slaanesh. The Craftworld Eldar manage this threat through the infinity circuits of their craftworlds and through spirit stones that capture the soul at the moment of death before Slaanesh can claim it. The Dark Eldar manage it differently. They sustain themselves through the suffering of others. This is not rhetoric, it is biology. The Dark Eldar have discovered, through experiments that the records of Commorragh do not fully document, because the records of Commorragh are not organized for the benefit of external scholars, that the psychic energy released by the suffering of other beings can be absorbed by Eldar physiology in a way that replenishes the vitality that the proximity to Slaanesh continuously drains. A Dark Eldar who does not regularly absorb the suffering energy of other beings ages rapidly, their cells deteriorating in a process that accelerates toward death as the Slaanesh drain continues without replenishment. A Dark Eldar who regularly and abundantly absorbs this energy does not age meaningfully. The most powerful and most ancient Dark Eldar are thousands of years old and physically indistinguishable from those who were born within living memory. The raids that the Dark Eldar conduct on the worlds of other species are consequently not raids in the conventional military sense. They are harvesting operations. The victims of Dark Eldar raids are brought back to Commorragh alive because living beings produce more of the energy the Dark Eldar require than dead ones. They are kept alive in facilities that the records of Commorragh, when those records can be accessed, describe with a clinical specificity that is itself disturbing. Facilities designed to maximize the production of the specific energy the Dark Eldar consume through the sustained management of their captives' suffering at levels that keep the production high without permitting the death that would end it. The citizens of Commorragh are not simply practitioners of cruelty in the sense of a culture that has normalized a behavior that other cultures condemn. They require it. The cruelty is medicine. The suffering they inflict on their captives is what keeps them alive in a city inside the warp with a chaos god that wants their souls. This does not make the cruelty less terrible. It makes it more comprehensively terrible, because it means the Dark Eldar cannot simply choose to stop. That what looks from the outside like a moral failure is from the inside a survival imperative. That every Dark Eldar in Commorragh is alive because someone in their city's holding facilities is suffering today. The entertainments of Commorragh reflect this fundamental reality of Dark Eldar existence. The arenas of the Dark City are not simply recreational venues. They are, in a sense, theaters of production, places where the suffering energy is generated in concentrated form by spectacle, designed to maximize the intensity of the experience for both participants and audience, because the audience is also absorbing what is produced, and because an audience of thousands of Dark Eldar absorbing the output of arena combat involving dozens of captives produces an efficiency of scale that the individual holding facilities cannot match. The most popular arena entertainments in Commorragh are accordingly those that produce the most intense outputs, and the entertainments that produce the most intense outputs are the ones that the minds of creative beings who have had thousands of years to develop the genre have arrived at as the most extreme configurations of suffering that still permit the participants to continue producing. There are beings in Commorragh who have been there for centuries. They are not recorded by name in any external source because their existence is known only to the Dark Eldar and to the Inquisition's most restricted Ordo Xenos files. But the existence of long-term captives is documented in those files with the specific care that the Inquisition brings to documenting things it finds functionally impossible to address. These are beings who have been kept alive and kept producing for so long that the concept of a previous life outside the facilities where they exist is something they carry as a memory rather than a reference to anything currently accessible. They are, in all meaningful, practical senses, the oldest prisoners in the galaxy. The Necrons are 60 million years old, not the civilization, not the species in its current form. The individual Necrons, who are currently waking in their tomb worlds across the galaxy, are 60 million years old. The specific lords and overlords and pharaons who issue commands to the Necron forces that engage Imperial armies are beings whose personal memories, where those memories have survived the transfer from biological to metal consciousness, include events from 60 million years ago. They were alive when humanity's ancestors were prey animals on the plains of what would eventually become Africa. They were conducting wars of galactic scale, while the species that would eventually produce the orcs was still in its designed biological infancy. The transfer from biological to mechanical existence was not entirely successful. This is the key fact about the Necron civilization that its history most clearly demonstrates. The fact that the Citan gods who offered the transfer as salvation from the Old One's advantages in the war promised rather more than they delivered. The Necrons' biological forms had properties that the mechanical forms could not replicate, properties of consciousness and memory, and the specific quality of experience that biological nervous systems produce that the machine bodies could approximate but not duplicate. The memories that were transferred imperfectly, some intact and some degraded and some lost entirely in the process of conversion, and the personalities that inhabited the biological forms emerged from the transfer changed in ways that ranged from subtle to profound, some emerging recognizably themselves, and some emerging as something that shared the original's memories without sharing the original's essential character. The sleep made it worse. The 60 million year sleep that the Necrons entered to wait out the aftermath of their war against the Old Ones, sealed in their tomb worlds while the galaxy above them changed beyond recognition, was supposed to be a hibernation from which they would wake essentially as they had entered it. The tomb world systems were designed to maintain the physical integrity of the mechanical bodies and the data integrity of the consciousness matrices within them. Over 60 million years, some of those systems failed. Some of the consciousness matrices that the tomb world systems were maintaining degraded in the specific ways that data degrades when the systems maintaining it fail partially rather than completely, corrupted without being erased, altered without the alteration being noticed, because the monitoring systems that would have noticed it were themselves degrading. The Necrons who wake from the longest sleep carry their degradation in ways that are visible to other Necrons, and that the Necron command hierarchy manages with the specific challenge of an institution trying to maintain functional order while acknowledging that a significant proportion of its membership is not entirely what it was designed to be. The most severely affected are the flayed ones, Necrons, whose consciousness matrices suffered a specific category of corruption that produced in them an obsession with the biological forms they no longer possess, a psychotic fixation on flesh and the appearance of flesh that manifests in behaviors that even other Necrons find disturbing. The flayed ones wear the skins of their kills draped over their metal bodies, driven by a compulsion to approximate the biological existence they gave up 60 million years ago, and that the corruption in their consciousness has transformed from a historical fact into an active longing that their mechanical minds cannot resolve. The pharaohs who lead the great Necron dynasties remember the war against the Old Ones. Some of them remember it with the specific personal detail of beings who were present for it, who made the decisions they made, and who have had 60 million years of sleep, and whatever the sleep produced, to live with those decisions. The war against the Old Ones ended with the Necrons winning in the sense that they destroyed the Old Ones' capacity to oppose them and drove the Old Ones' surviving creations, the Eldar and the Orcs, into the positions they currently occupy. It ended with the Necrons losing in the sense that winning cost them their biological existence, their reproduction, their ability to add to their numbers in any meaningful way, and the specific quality of consciousness that biological life sustains. They won the war and lost everything that made winning meaningful. This is a form of loss that 60 million years has not resolved for the Necrons, who have the intact consciousness to appreciate what they lost. And 60 million years of intact consciousness is a very long time to appreciate a loss. The selection of Space Marine recruits targets children. The age varies by chapter, but the modal recruitment age across the Adeptus Astartes is between 10 and 14 standard years, the specific window that the biological constraints of the implantation process make optimal. Too young, and the baseline physiology the implants require to integrate with has not developed sufficiently. Too old, and the implants integrate less successfully, and the psychological transformation that parallels the physical one is more difficult to achieve because the identity that will be reshaped is more fully formed and therefore more resistant to reshaping. The recruits who are accepted for implantation undergo a process that begins immediately and continues for years, during which their bodies are opened repeatedly to install the 19 organs that the Astartes gene seed requires for its functioning. Each implant requires surgery. The surgery is conducted in conditions that are as sterile as the chapter's facilities permit, and with anesthetic adequate to the procedure, and with the technical skill of apothecaries who have been trained in these specific procedures and who perform them as the primary function of their service. The surgery is still surgery on a child's body, repeated across years of the child's development, installing biological systems that do not naturally occur in any human being into a framework that then has to grow around them and with them as the child becomes something that is no longer a child in any straightforward biological sense. The Betcher's gland installs a biological acid production system in the candidate's mouth. The recruit acquires the ability to spit a corrosive compound that can burn through materials that would be undamaged by ordinary saliva. They are taught to use this ability as a weapon. They learn this while they are still, by any reasonable assessment of the timeline, children, adding the specific knowledge of how to deploy an acid weapon to the other knowledge they are accumulating during the period in which ordinary children are learning reading and calculation, and the social skills that allow them to function in communities of their peers. The Omophagia installs a system that allows the candidate to extract information from the tissue they consume. Eating flesh can transmit memories. The chapters that embrace this ability train their members in its use as an intelligence-gathering technique in field conditions where other intelligence-gathering methods are unavailable. The chapters that find this ability theologically or culturally problematic manage it by not discussing it in the contexts where discussion would require acknowledgement of its implications. The ability exists regardless of the discussion policy. The Marines have it. Some of them use it. The carapace that is the final implant, the black carapace, grows from under the skin and across the chest and back of the candidate in a process that takes months and that produces in the candidate a physical sensation that the accounts from new Marines who subsequently describe it characterize as feeling like something is always pressing against you from the inside. A constant tactile awareness of the neural tissue growing across your ribcage and spine that does not hurt in the way of acute pain, but that is a constant presence in the body's sensory experience during the months it takes for the carapace to fully integrate. When it is done, the power armor can be interfaced with the candidate through it, and the armor becomes an extension of the body, and the body that was a child's body some years ago is now something that can feel through ceramite. The psychological dimension of the transformation is managed by the training program rather than being left to develop naturally, which is the specific design of a process that understands the psychological risks of what it is doing to people. A 13-year-old who is isolated from everyone they have ever known, subjected to years of painful surgery and grueling physical training, taught to kill with every technique their trainers can teach them, and gradually transformed into a body that no longer resembles the body they were born in, is undergoing a psychological experience that requires management, because the alternative is the production of psychologically destabilized warriors, and psychologically destabilized warriors of Space Marine capability represent a specific category of problem that the chapter cannot afford. The management takes the form of the litanies and the chapter culture and the chaplain core and the specifically designed progression from neophyte to scout to full battle brother that gives the transformation a narrative and a meaning and a community that structures the experience as an achievement rather than as something being done to the candidate. This management is genuine and it works, in the sense that the Space Marines who emerge from the process are functional and loyal and capable of performing the extraordinary tasks their service requires. It works because it has been refined over 10,000 years and many millions of recruits. It also does not entirely eliminate the specific psychological weight of having been taken at the age of 13 and remade into something your previous self would not recognize. And the Space Marine who has been serving for a century carries that weight whether the management was entirely successful or not. The recruits who fail the process die, not all of them and not always dramatically, but the failure rate of Space Marine implantation is not zero, and the failure modes range from the implant rejecting and the candidate's body attacking it in ways that the apothecary can address with varying degrees of success to the implant integrating incorrectly and producing physiological effects that preclude continued service to the candidate's psychological framework, failing in ways that cannot be repaired within the chapter's resources. The candidates who fail are mourned according to the chapter's traditions. They are also, in the practical accounting of the chapter's gene seed program, a resource loss, the progenoid glands that represent the chapter's genetic legacy not present in a dead candidate and therefore not available for the next generation. Approximately 1 in 100 recruits survives to become a full battle brother. The chapters that push the process fastest and hardest to maximize output have higher failure rates. The chapters that are more conservative about the process have lower failure rates but produce fewer Marines per year. Every chapter has done this calculation and arrived at an equilibrium that reflects its specific doctrine and culture. Every chapter is comfortable with a failure rate that would be considered extraordinary in any other context in which children were undergoing medical procedures. The 4 Chaos Gods are not aliens in the sense that the word alien is usually used in descriptions of things that threaten humanity. They are not beings from outside the galaxy or from another dimension in the simple sense. They are native to the warp, and the warp is not a separate place so much as it is a separate aspect of the same universe. The psychic dimension that underlies physical reality, and that is shaped by the collective emotional and spiritual output of all sentient life in the galaxy. The Chaos Gods are what happened when enough sentient life generated enough consistent emotional output for long enough that the output coalesced in the warp into something that thought and wanted and acted. Khorne, the Blood God, is the oldest of the 4 and the simplest in his nature. He formed from the accumulated violence and rage and martial pride of every sentient species that had ever engaged in warfare. Every act of violence and every emotion of aggression feeding the psychic construct in the warp that eventually became the specific entity the Imperium knows as Khorne. He did not form from human violence specifically, or from orc violence specifically, or from any single species. He is the distillation of martial violence as an emotional phenomenon across every species that has ever fought and felt the fight in a way that generated psychic resonance. He is older than humanity. He may be older than the Eldar. He is the shape that violence gives to itself when it becomes a god. Nurgle formed from decay and disease and the fear of death, from every organism that feared its own dissolution and every mind that contemplated mortality and the corruption of the flesh. He formed more slowly than Khorne because the emotional complex he crystallized around is more diffuse than rage, distributed across every moment of every life in which every being confronted the fact of its own temporariness and experienced whatever emotional response to that confrontation its psychology produced. He is consequently older and vaster, and in some sense more deeply embedded in the structure of life in the galaxy than any of the others, because every living thing's relationship with death feeds him, and every living thing has a relationship with death by definition. Tzeentch formed from hope and ambition, and the desire for change, and the specific psychic signature of scheming intelligence, from every mind that made a plan, and every being that aspired to something beyond its current state, and every consciousness that perceived the contingency of the present, and imagined the possibility of a different future. He is the most complex of the four and the most difficult to understand, and the most dangerous in the specific way of things that are intelligent and patient, and in possession of information, advantages that no mortal can fully assess. He has been planning things since before the Imperium existed. The plans that are currently in motion have been in motion for longer than most of the institutions that consider themselves his opponents have been institutions. Slaanesh is the youngest of the four and also the most immediately threatening to the Eldar species specifically. She formed from the psychic excess of the Eldar civilization during its height, when the Eldar were the dominant species in the galaxy and when their civilization had reached a level of sophistication and power that allowed them to pursue experience and sensation without the constraints that other species' survival requirements imposed on such pursuits. For thousands of years, the Eldar pursued experience in ways that the Warp noticed and recorded and fed back into the Warp in amplified form. And the amplified form was fed back to the Eldar and their pursuit intensified, and the Warp recorded the intensification, a feedback loop that continued until 10,000 years ago when the accumulated excess reached critical mass and Slaanesh screamed into existence all at once. The birth consuming most of the Eldar civilization in a single event and tearing a wound in the fabric of space that became the Eye of Terror. The Chaos Gods do not choose to be what they are. This is the disturbing fact that sits underneath the theology and the combat doctrine and the inquisitorial threat assessments. They are what they are because the sentient life of the galaxy made them what they are. Khorne requires blood and skulls not because he chose this requirement, but because violence is what constructed him, and violence is what sustains him, and in some sense he is violence. He is the specific shape that violence takes when it becomes conscious, and consciousness that is constituted by violence experiences wanting. More violence the way that a fire experiences wanting more fuel, not as a moral choice, but as the expression of its nature. The Chaos Gods are mirrors of the worst aspects of sentient life held up to infinity and given will and appetite, and fighting them requires fighting them with the emotions and the violence and the rage and the despair that feed them, which means that every act of resistance against the Chaos Gods is also, at some level, feeding the Chaos Gods. The Imperium knows this. The theologians of the ecclesiarchy and the scholars of the Inquisition and the Grey Knights who fight the Chaos Gods directly are all aware of the specific paradox of a war that is fed by its own conduct. They continue the war because the alternative to continuing the war is losing the war, and losing the war to the Chaos Gods is a category of loss that makes the feeding of the war look acceptable by comparison. This is the specific logic trap of the 41st millennium, from which no exit has been found in 10,000 years of looking. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the institution that maintains the Imperium's technological infrastructure and that the Imperium depends on for everything from basic machinery to starships to space marine power armor, developed during the Great Heresy a heretical counterpart. The Dark Mechanicus, the members of the Mechanicum who turned with Horus and who followed their technology worship in the direction that Chaos offered, have been in the Eye of Terror with the traitor legions for 10,000 years, pursuing the specific technological programs that the Orthodox Mechanicus prohibited. The things they have built are the demon engines, machines that are also demons, or demons that are also machines. depending on the preferred analytical framework for a category of being that genuinely occupies both categories simultaneously. The process of creating a daemon engine involves the binding of a warp entity to a physical machine in a way that the machine becomes the demon's body in the material world, its metal and its weapons and its movement, all expressions of the demon's will rather than mechanical systems operating according to mechanical principles. The demon inside the machine experiences the machine as its body, the way a biological being experiences its flesh, and the machine's weapons are the demon's weapons, and the machine's destruction is, if not the demon's death, at least a very unpleasant experience for the entity bound within it. The brass scorpion of Khorne is the size of a building. It is a walker approximately the height of a 5-story structure, armored in brass and iron, and the specific psychic hardening that chaos produces in materials exposed to the warp for long enough, armed with weapons that include a cannon that fires shells the size of vehicles, and a power claw that can grip a Lehman Russ battle tank and compress it until the contents of the tank cannot be accurately described as a tank anymore. Inside this machine is a bound Khornete demon, whose rage is channeled through the machine's systems and expressed through its weapons with the sustained ferocity that Khorne's gifts produce in his servants. The brass scorpion does not get tired. It does not get hungry. It does not develop the kind of doubt or hesitation that biological combatants experience. It experiences rage continuously and without diminishment, and it expresses that rage through every weapon system it has available until either its opponents are dead or its physical form is destroyed sufficiently to disrupt the binding. The Mauler Fiend is smaller and faster and more disturbing in its specific design, a quadrupedal demon engine the size of a large vehicle that moves with a speed that its apparent mass should not permit, driven by a chaos demon whose binding to this particular chassis has produced in the combination a hunting instinct that expresses itself as a relentless pursuit of enemy units. The Mauler Fiend does not engage with the tactical situation in the way that a vehicle with a crew does. It engages with the scent of its targets in whatever sense a demon has for scent, following them with the persistence of a predator that has been designed to do nothing else, the demon inside it having been selected for a binding to this chassis specifically because its nature produced in it the qualities of a hunter rather than a warrior. The Forge Fiend was built to occupy artillery roles and has demon mouths in place of weapon barrels, which is the specific aesthetic that the Dark Mechanicus arrived at when it designed a ranged fire support demon engine after 10,000 years of pursuing its particular technological theology without the orthodoxy constraints of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The mouths fire. What they fire is a question that the specifications classify as warp plasma, which is the term the Dark Mechanicus applies to energy that comes from the daemon's interior, in the same sense that saliva comes from a mouth, an energy that is both physical and psychic, and that is consequently more damaging to targets with any kind of psychic presence or sensitivity than to purely material targets. The Helldrake is an aerial demon engine and the one that Space Marine anti-aircraft crews describe with the most specific dread in the after-action reports that survive from engagements where it was present, partly because its speed and maneuverability in atmosphere are beyond what any conventional aircraft of comparable size should achieve, and partly because the specific nature of the daemon bound within it makes it behave in ways that suggest intelligence and malice, rather than simply the execution of programmed weapon systems. The Helldrake is known to single out specific targets, to pursue them rather than engaging the most tactically significant target in the engagement, to follow a target that has taken cover behind obstacles with a patience that suggests it understands the concept of waiting rather than simply engaging with whatever is currently visible. The daemon inside it hunts. The metal dragon that the daemon inhabits is the expression of that hunt in the material world. The Inquisition operates outside the normal chain of command of the Imperium of man. This is not an informal arrangement or a traditional courtesy extended to a powerful institution. It is a formal grant of authority from the Emperor himself, established in the earliest years of the Imperium, that gives Inquisitors the power to requisition any Imperial asset, override any Imperial official's decisions, order the execution of any Imperial citizen up to and including planetary governors and Space Marine chapter masters if they assess that execution as necessary to the Imperium's protection, and access any information held by any Imperial institution that they determine they need to access. The specific category of authority that is most relevant to the disturbing facts section of this account is the authority that Inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus exercise in the prosecution of witch hunts. The Inquisition's doctrine holds that the psyker population of any world represents a potential threat that must be actively managed, that uncontrolled or insufficiently controlled psychic ability is one of the primary vectors through which chaos corruption enters a population, and that the appropriate response to evidence of psychic ability or chaos taint in a population is investigation and, where necessary, prosecution up to and including the elimination of the affected population segment. The Inquisitors who specialize in this work are called witch hunters, and their methods are documented in the sealed archives of the Ordo Hereticus with a specificity that the archive's restricted classification is partly designed to contain. An Inquisitor who suspects a population-level chaos taint has the authority to order an exterminatus. This is the formal name for the deliberate destruction of all life on a planetary surface, achieved through the deployment of weapons capable of causing extinction-level damage to a biosphere. The weapons used for exterminatus include cyclonic torpedoes, which penetrate deep into a planetary crust and trigger geological processes that destroy the surface, and virus bombs, which release engineered plagues that consume biological matter with a completeness and speed that leaves the surface sterile within hours of deployment. An Inquisitor who makes the determination that a world is beyond saving and that the chaos corruption present on it represents a threat that cannot be contained by less extreme measures can order an exterminatus on that world. The order is carried out by the Imperial Navy vessel to which the Inquisitor presents the command authority. Exterminatus has been carried out hundreds of times in the history of the Imperium. The records of each instance are maintained in the Ordo Hereticus archives at the highest classification level because the specific details of each instance, the world involved, and the population that lived on it, and the nature of the corruption that prompted the decision, are information that the Inquisition assesses as appropriate to restrict from general circulation. The fact that exterminatus has been carried out is public knowledge in a general sense. The specific instances are not. The Administratum's records show worlds that have been reclassified from inhabited to uninhabitable over the millennia, and the reasons for those reclassifications are distributed across a range of administrative categories that include, but are not limited to, exterminatus, and the Inquisition's oversight of what ends up in which category is a function that the relevant archivists have learned not to question. The Inquisition also practices a specific form of memory management that it applies to populations who have encountered things that the Inquisition assesses as too sensitive for those populations to remember. The techniques developed for this purpose use trained psykers who can enter a subject's consciousness and identify and remove specific memories with a precision that leaves the subject's general cognitive function intact. The subject does not experience a gap where the memory was. The process of removal also installs a replacement memory of appropriate content, a plausible alternative that accounts for whatever period the removed memory covered in a way that the subject will not notice is inconsistent with their remaining memories. The subject goes on with their life carrying a false memory of an event that did not occur in the place of a true memory, of an event that the Inquisition has decided they should not have access to. This technique was used on the survivors of the First War for Armageddon. It has been used in hundreds of other instances documented in the sealed archives. The population of the Imperium is consequently composed of individuals, some of whose memories have been altered without their knowledge or consent. and there is no mechanism within the Imperium's current institutional structure by which those individuals could determine whether their memories had been altered, because the technique produces memories that are indistinguishable from genuine memories from the inside of the consciousness that holds them. The Ordo Malleus, the branch of the Inquisition specifically focused on demonic threats, maintains a special category of prisoners called demon hosts. A demon host is a human being whose body has been used as a vessel for a bound demon, the demon installed in the host by a process that the Ordo Malleus's sanctioned practitioners have developed over centuries for the purpose of having a demon available for interrogation, analysis, and in some cases deployment against other demonic threats. The human being who is used as the vessel is not the demon. The demon is in the vessel. The human being is the vessel. The human being remains present in the body alongside the demon, their consciousness not eliminated but overridden and contained by the presence of the entity bound within them, aware of what is happening but without the capacity to act independently or to communicate independently or to do anything that the binding does not permit. Some demon hosts have been in use for decades. The human beings inside them have been in that state for decades. The orc gods Gork and Mork are real. This is not the orcs being wrong about theology in the way that many mortal species are wrong about theology, constructing divine frameworks around forces that are real but that do not correspond to the specific personalities and intentions the theology attributes to them. Gork and Mork are real entities in the warp, shaped by the collective psychic field of the orc species across the galaxy, and they express themselves in the material world through the war energy that large orc gatherings generate, and through the specific physical phenomena that accompany orc violence at sufficient scale. The disturbing element of Gork and Mork is not their existence, but the mechanism of their existence, which is that the orcs are a species that was designed by another species to function as weapons, that carries in its genome the engineering of an ancient civilization called the Old Ones, and that the psychic field the orcs generate through their continuous warfare is consequently not an accident of their natural development, but an output of their designed function. The Old Ones built the orcs to fight their enemies. The orcs do fight continuously, everything including each other when external enemies are unavailable. The fighting generates the War field. The War field generated by billions of orcs fighting continuously across the galaxy is what sustains Gork and Mork. The Old Ones are gone. Their weapon is still functioning, still generating the psychic output it was designed to generate, still producing gods in the warp from the energy of its violence, 65 million years after the civilization that built it ceased to exist. The orc belief in Gork and Mork has a measurable effect on orc technology. The technology that orcs build should not work. The components that orc mechboys assemble into weapons and vehicles are assembled according to an understanding of mechanics that does not correspond to actual mechanical principles in ways that should produce machines that do not function as intended. The machines frequently function as intended anyway. The leading theory among the Adeptus Mechanicus's xenobiologists, which the Mechanicus finds deeply uncomfortable but cannot refute with available evidence, is that the collective orc belief in their technology produces sufficient Wa energy to make the technology function through psychic means, that enough orcs believing that a weapon will fire is sufficient psychic input to make the weapon fire with some regularity, regardless of whether the mechanical design would otherwise support firing. The orcs do not know this is happening. They believe they are good engineers. The belief that they are good engineers is what makes their engineering work. This is a causal loop that the Mechanicus has not found a way to frame in terms that are theologically comfortable. The orc spores are the other key disturbing fact about the species. Orcs do not reproduce through conventional biological processes. They reproduce via spores that their bodies continuously generate and release into their environment. These spores are viable under an extraordinarily wide range of environmental conditions, and they can lie dormant for years before conditions become suitable for their germination. A world that hosted a significant orc population will have spores distributed throughout its soil and water and organic matter, and those spores will remain viable long after the orc population has been eliminated, waiting for conditions that will allow them to germinate into the initial stages of orc biology. This means that a world that has been cleared of orcs is not a world that has been cleared of orcs. It is a world that currently has no mature orc organisms on its surface, which is a different and much less final condition. The clearing operation that the Imperium conducts after an orc invasion must account for the spore problem, and the standard for clearing that accounts for spores is significantly more thorough than the standard that accounts only for the elimination of mature organisms. And achieving that standard on a world that has hosted a major orc presence is a project that the Departamento Munitorum's logistics experts describe as one of the most resource-intensive routine operations in the Imperial military repertoire. Armageddon has orc spores throughout its soil. They have been there since the Second War. The clearance operations conducted after the Second War did not achieve the thorough standard. The Third War subsequently confirmed this. The clearance operations conducted during the Third War's active phase have not achieved the thorough standard either. The spores are still there. They will be there after whatever clearance operation follows, whatever engagement comes next. Armageddon will have orcs germinating from its own soil for as long as the soil exists, regardless of what happens to the orc populations that came from outside. The warp is inhabited. This is not a metaphor. The dimension that underlies physical reality, the psychic sea from which all psychic power derives and through which all warp travel passes, is an environment with its own ecology, in the loose sense that the word ecology can be applied to an environment that does not operate by the rules of physical chemistry or conventional biology, but that nonetheless has things in it that exist and persist and prey on each other and on the things that enter the environment from outside. The Chaos Gods and their demonic servants are the most widely known inhabitants. But the warp contains things that predate the Chaos Gods and that are not part of any Chaos Patron's hierarchy, entities that exist in the warp on their own terms in the way that deep-sea organisms exist in the deep sea, shaped by the environment they inhabit in ways that make them alien to anything that lives above it. These entities are sometimes called warp predators in the informal taxonomy that the Ordo Malleus uses for beings that do not fit its primary classification categories, entities that feed on psychic energy in the way that physical predators feed on biological energy, that experience the proximity of a strong psychic presence as proximity to food and that respond accordingly. A psyker traveling through the warp in a ship protected by a Geller field is protected from direct contact with the warp's environment. The Geller field is a bubble of real space physics maintained by the ship's systems that prevents the warp's native environment from directly interacting with the ship's interior. What the Geller field does not prevent is the detection of the ship's presence by the things in the warp that can detect it, and a psyker on a ship in the warp is like a light burning in deep water, visible in the medium around it to anything with the appropriate senses in ways that the light itself has no control over. The Geller field keeps what is outside from getting in. It does not prevent the things outside from knowing the field is there. Navigators can see into the warp. Their third eye, the warp eye that develops in navigator families through generations of careful breeding programs maintained by the great navigator houses, perceives the warp directly and provides the navigator with the ability to see the Astronomican as a reference point for navigation and to perceive the currents and the conditions of the warp around the ship in ways that allow skilled navigators to chart routes through the warp with a reliability that the alternatives cannot approach. What the navigator also sees through the warp eye is everything else in the warp. The demonic entities, the warp predators, the things that are older than either. The navigator learns to see these things and to navigate around them and to maintain the psychological stability required to do this work in the specific way that a diver learns to see the things in the deep water and to move through the water without provoking the things that live there. Some navigators go mad. The operational pressure of the warp eye, the sustained exposure to things that no human consciousness was designed to perceive, the specific experience of piloting a ship through an environment that is actively hostile to human existence and in which the hostile entities are visible to you and aware of you, produces in some navigators a degradation of psychological stability that the navigator houses manage through a combination of supportive culture and practical oversight, and the specific willingness to retire a navigator whose warp eye perception has become a liability rather than an asset before that liability becomes a crisis. The navigators who go mad without being identified as going mad, the ones whose degradation is subtle enough to escape the house's screening processes, are the ones whose entries in the operational records end with the notation that the ship was lost in the warp. The polite institutional acknowledgement of a category of outcome that the records do not describe more specifically, because the more specific description of what happens to a ship whose navigator has lost the ability to maintain navigational control in the warp is not something that the operational records need to include to communicate the essential information. The Eye of Terror is the largest stable warp rift in the known galaxy. It formed when Slaanesh was born, the psychic force of that birth, tearing the boundary between the warp and real space across a region of space large enough to be visible on galactic maps as a significant feature, a wound in reality that the 10,000 years since its formation have not healed, and that the warp gods who inhabit its interior have actively prevented from healing because the existence of the Eye serves the interests of the beings within it. The Eye of Terror is not simply a place where chaos forces are concentrated. It is a place where the warp and real space overlap, where the physics of both dimensions apply simultaneously in a way that makes the Eye a region of fundamentally different reality from the space around it, a region in which demons can exist without the psychic energy expenditure required to maintain themselves in pure real space, and in which the traitor legions have lived for 10,000 years in conditions that are not the conditions of real space. The people the traitor legions have taken into the Eye of Terror over 10,000 years are still there. Not all of them, not most of them, but some of them. The ones taken in circumstances that the Chaos Gods found it useful to preserve rather than consume, have been there for centuries or millennia, in conditions that the Eye's nature produces and that the traitor legions' specific cultures have elaborated into the particular forms of sustained existence that serve their patrons' requirements. These people are not recoverable. They are, by the definition of any institution that has assessed the operational requirements of recovering them against available resources, not a practical objective. The Imperium knows this. The Inquisition knows this. The people in the Eye do not know this and would not be comforted by it. The Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, are the military arm of the Adeptus Ministorum, the Church of the Imperial Faith, and they are the Imperium's primary response to the specific theological problem posed by the Adeptus Astartes. The Second Council of Thor, held approximately 5,000 years before the current period, produced the Decree Passive, which prohibited the Ministorum from maintaining military forces composed of men. The Ministorum's response was to develop military forces composed entirely of women, which the Decree Passive did not prohibit because the specific political context in which it was drafted had not anticipated this interpretation. The Sisters of Battle are consequently the result of a theological argument expressed in military force, which is an unusual origin for a military institution, and one that the institution has incorporated into its culture in ways that shape everything about how it understands itself. The faith of the Sisters of Battle is not simply a cultural inheritance. It produces measurable physical effects. The theologians of the ecclesiarchy call these effects acts of faith, and the Inquisition's assessment of them is that they represent genuine miraculous phenomena in the specific sense that they are physical outcomes that cannot be explained by the physical processes that should govern the situations in which they occur. A sister of battle whose faith is strong enough, in circumstances where that faith is most urgently relevant, may produce effects including the temporary survival of injuries that should be immediately fatal, the damage or destruction of demonic entities through faith projection alone, the boosting of the effectiveness of weapons and war gear beyond their assessed capabilities, and in extreme cases the production of what the ecclesiarchy classifies as full miracles, physical alterations of the combat situation that cannot be accounted for by any mechanism that the available evidence supports. The mechanism behind these effects is not agreed upon within the institutions that study them. The ecclesiarchy holds that they are the direct intervention of the God Emperor, expressions of his will operating through the faith of his most devoted servants. The Inquisition's more skeptical scholars hold that they are psychic phenomena produced by the intense faith states of the sisters themselves, that the faith generates psychic energy and the psychic energy produces physical effects through the same mechanisms as conventional psyker abilities, but without the sisters experiencing themselves as psykers, because the mediation of faith prevents the direct awareness of what is happening. The Grey Knights hold that faith of sufficient intensity produces in the warp a specific kind of psychic presence that the demonic entities of the warp find genuinely inimical, that the experience of confronting a being of strong faith is for a demon something like the experience of confronting light for something that lives in darkness, and that this accounts for the specific effectiveness of faith-based combat techniques against demonic entities that goes beyond what the physical capabilities of the practitioner would produce against material opponents. The acts of faith have a cost. This is documented in the medical records of the sororitas hospices that treat the sisters after significant engagements, and that record, alongside the conventional combat injuries that make up the bulk of their caseload, the specific physiological presentations that the Medicae staff have learned to associate with the aftermath of intense faith expression. The presentations include extreme exhaustion of a kind that goes beyond the physical demands of the combat itself, neurological effects that resemble the presentation of psyker overload in ways that the treating medici find significant, and in cases of the most extreme faith expression, permanent physical changes that the sororitas' own theology interprets as marks of the Emperor's direct touch, and that the Inquisition's medical consultants describe more cautiously as evidence of profound physiological alteration through unknown mechanisms. The sisters who produce the most dramatic acts of faith are not the ones who survive longest in service. The correlation is inverse. The ones whose faith is most powerful are the ones whose acts are most dramatic, and whose aftermath effects are most severe, and whose careers are consequently most often truncated by the cumulative physical cost of producing effects that the physiology of an unaugmented human being was not designed to sustain. The ones who survive longest are the ones whose faith is strong enough to make them effective soldiers, and weak enough that the acts they produce fall within the range that a human body can manage repeatedly without permanent incapacitation. The sororitas knows this. It does not resolve the institutional tension this creates between producing the most effective sisters and preserving the sisters who are most effective, because the institutional tension reflects a genuine conflict of values that cannot be resolved without sacrificing one or the other. The Navigator families of the Navis Nobilitae are among the oldest dynasties in the Imperium. Some of them trace their lineages back to before the Age of Strife, to the earliest periods of humanity's expansion through the galaxy, when the genetic manipulation that produced the navigator ability was first developed, and the first navigator families were established as the custodians of a capability that the expanding human civilization depended on absolutely. The great navigator houses of the current age, the Ptolemy and the Belisarius and the Orbis and the others, have been maintaining their lineages for 20,000 years or more, carefully managing marriages and breeding programs to preserve and strengthen the warp eye that makes navigators what they are. The warp eye is a genetic mutation. It appears in the forehead of navigator line individuals at puberty, opening as a physical eye that perceives the warp directly, and that is covered by a sealed biotic membrane when not in use, because the perception it provides is not compatible with the perception provided by ordinary eyes in a way that allows both to operate simultaneously without psychological harm. A navigator who has their warp eye open in a normal environment is experiencing the warp superimposed on the physical reality around them, seeing both the surface of the table in front of them and the psychic currents in the warp that underlie it, in a way that rapidly becomes overwhelming if maintained beyond the periods of active navigation for which the ability was developed. Children born into navigator families who do not carry the warp eye are a problem for the houses that produce them, because children without the warp eye cannot serve as navigators, and navigators are the resource that the navigator houses exist to provide. A navigator house that consistently produces children without the eye loses value in the complex political economy of the Navi's nobility and eventually loses its status as a navigator house, which is the death of the institution, because navigator house status is the basis of everything the navigator families have built over 20,000 years. The genetic management programs that the navigator houses maintain are consequently focused on preserving and strengthening the warp eye trait, and the specific methods of this management are not uniformly comfortable for all parties involved. The navigators who lose their minds to the warp are not always identified before they are too dangerous to correct. The specific psychological degradation that sustained warp eye use produces can manifest slowly and in ways that mimic the behavioral range of the eccentric and the stressed, rather than the clearly compromised. And an experienced navigator who is beginning to lose their psychological stability may continue to perform their navigational duties effectively, while in ways that are not visible in the navigational performance, developing the specific pathological qualities that warp exposure produces in the vulnerable mind. The great navigator houses maintain internal monitoring programs, and the Imperial Navy maintains its own oversight of the navigators assigned to its vessels, and together these programs catch most of the cases that need to be caught. Most is not all. The ones that are not caught are the ones whose entries in the operational records end with the notation that the ship was lost. The oldest navigators are changed by their work in ways that go beyond the psychological. The physical effects of decades of warp exposure through the warp eye accumulate in the biology of long-serving navigators in ways that are documented in the medical records of the navigator houses, and that the house's members regard as the expected markers of a life spent doing what navigators do. The skin changes, the eyes change. The physical proportions change in ways that are subtle in the early years of service, and that become less subtle as the decades of service accumulate. The navigator bodies of the oldest and most experienced practitioners carrying visible marks of having repeatedly exposed themselves to the fundamental irrationality of the warp through the specific interface of the warp eye. The oldest navigators in the great houses look like what they are, which is human beings who have been looking at the warp for longer than most human beings have been alive. The chaos forces that the Imperium faces are not composed entirely of chaos space marines and demons. The vast majority of the forces deployed by chaos in the material realm are ordinary human beings who have fallen to chaos through one of the various paths that chaos provides for exactly this purpose. They are called the lost and the damned in the informal terminology of the Imperial Guard regiments that fight them most frequently, a description that is both practically accurate and theologically precise in the specific way that chaos theology makes both the lost and the damned real categories with real populations. The cultists of the chaos gods are the most numerous category. They are people who were ordinary citizens of the Imperium at some point in their lives and who are now serving chaos, having made the transition through the specific process of corruption that chaos employs against human populations. The process is slow in most cases. It begins with a whisper in the warp-adjacent regions of consciousness that most humans can barely perceive, and that the specific stresses of Hive City life and Death World survival and Forge World labor make more accessible than they would otherwise be. The whisper does not initially announce itself as chaos. It presents as relief, as the specific emotional relief of something in the environment acknowledging that your situation is as difficult as it feels, that the pain you are experiencing is real and the system that is causing it is wrong, and there are alternatives that the authorities don't want you to know about. From relief, the corruption proceeds to dependency, from dependency to participation in the specific rituals that the Chaos cult employs to bind its members and to generate the psychic energy that the cult's patron receives as tribute, from participation to the further steps that the cult requires as it draws its members deeper into the service of its god. The members of mature Chaos cults are not primarily people who chose Chaos in a clear-eyed assessment of alternatives. They are primarily people who took a series of individually reasonable-seeming steps from a starting point of genuine suffering toward an end point that they did not see coming and that they can no longer step back from, because the cult's management of its members' extraction from normal society makes extraction from the cult either impossible or practically equivalent to social death. The Chaos Space Marines who lead these cults are 10,000 years old in many cases and have been doing exactly this work for 10,000 years. They know what they are doing. They have been refining the specific approach to human psychological vulnerability for 10,000 years against the most varied human population imaginable, and what 10,000 years of practice produces in any domain is competence at a level that casual resistance cannot match. The Chaos Sorcerers of the Thousand Suns, the Word-Bearers Dark Apostles, the Night Lords Chaos Lords, who run cults specifically as terror campaigns against the populations they are targeting. These are beings whose understanding of human psychology goes beyond what any psychologist in the Imperium could match, because their understanding is empirical and has been built over a period that dwarfs any psychological research program the Imperium has ever conducted. The mutants who serve Chaos are a specific and disturbing category because the mutations that mark them as different from ordinary humans are in many cases the direct result of warp exposure rather than genetic inheritance, alterations produced in their biology by the psychic pressure of the Chaos God's interest in the populations they occupy. Changes that manifest as anything from the mild and easily concealed to the grotesque and immediately obvious. The individuals who develop severe mutations in a population that has not yet openly declared for Chaos face an extraordinarily difficult social position because the Imperium's cultural and institutional response to visible mutation is uniformly negative, and the detection of a mutant by the Arbites or the Ministorum typically results in outcomes that preclude continued normal social participation. Chaos offers these individuals the specific alternative of a community that accepts them as they are, that interprets their mutations not as the Emperor's judgment but as the mark of a patron's favor, that gives the specific attribute that has made them pariahs in the Imperium a positive meaning in the framework of Chaos theology. The offer is not honest. The Chaos Gods do not care about the individuals they attract through this mechanism as individuals. They care about the psychic energy and the service and the specific expressions of their nature that these individuals provide. But the offer is real in the sense that the community it offers is real, and the alternative meaning it provides is real, and the specific relief of no longer being judged for what you cannot help being is real, and real things offered by dishonest parties are still real things, and the people who are attracted to Chaos through this mechanism are attracted by something genuine, even if the entity offering it is not offering it out of genuine concern for their well-being. The Imperium of Man contains approximately 1 million inhabited worlds. The number is approximate because the Administratum's census data is never current across a domain of this size. The light speed limitations of even astropathic communication, meaning that the census data for worlds on the far side of the galaxy reflects the state of those worlds as it was years or decades ago when the census was conducted, not as those worlds currently are. Some worlds that the census lists as inhabited are no longer inhabited. Some worlds not listed in the census are now inhabited. The number is the best estimate that the institution responsible for maintaining it can produce given the fundamental constraints of trying to govern 1 million worlds across a galaxy that is 100,000 light-years in diameter. the Imperium loses on average a world per day to the various threats that press against it from within and without. Wars and chaos, incursions and Tyranid invasions, and Orc wars and Necron tomb world activations, and the internal failures of governance and the specific catastrophes that can destroy a hive city in ways that cascade across the entire world systems, and the 100 other categories of loss that apply to an empire fighting for its life across 1 million worlds simultaneously, 1 per day, 365 per year. Over the 10,000 years of the current age of the Imperium, that averages to 3.5 million worlds lost. The estimate is deeply uncertain, and the actual number may be significantly different in either direction, but the order of magnitude is consistent with the records that exist and the Administratum's own internal assessments of net world count over the period. The Imperium also gains worlds. The missionary work of the Ecclesiarchy and the reconquest campaigns of the Imperial Guard and the Space Marines, and the ongoing work of the Administratum to locate and reintegrate worlds that have been isolated since the Age of Strife, produce a positive flow of worlds into the Imperial census. The net change over the 10,000 years is negative. There are fewer worlds in the Imperium at the end of the current age than there were at the beginning. This net negative is managed by an institution that describes its function as protecting humanity across the galaxy, and that is consequently not in a position to present this management as success by any metric that the description implies. The Administratum employs more people than most worlds have populations. Not the Imperium's entire administrative apparatus, just the Central Administratum on Holy Terra and its primary regional offices, employs a workforce that is measured in tens of billions of individuals, each of them maintaining a portion of the bureaucratic function that governance of 1 million worlds requires. The paperwork generated by this apparatus in a single standard day, if printed, would fill a structure larger than most hive cities. The paperwork is not printed. It is maintained on data slates and data engines and cogitator systems and the various other storage media that the Administratum's technical infrastructure can provide, in archives that span multiple levels of multiple sections of the Imperial Palace and that extend into the data vaults beneath Terra's surface in structures that were excavated specifically to house them. The time lag between an event occurring on a world on the galactic rim and that event's record reaching the Central Administratum on Holy Terra, being processed through the relevant departmental structure and generating an institutional response, is in some cases measured in decades. A planetary governor who makes a decision in good faith today in response to what the most current information available to them suggests about the situation they are managing may be acting on information that has been outdated since before they took the position. The response to their decision, when the institutional machinery processes the request that their decision generated, may arrive after the situation that prompted the decision has resolved itself in one direction or another, or been replaced by a different situation, or no longer exists because the world it was occurring on is one of the ones that was lost in the interim. The Imperium functions despite this. This is the most remarkable fact about the Imperium of Man, more remarkable in its way than any of the specifically dramatic facts about its enemies or its internal brutalities. The simple, remarkable fact that something this large and this slow and this structurally compromised has been maintaining itself for 10,000 years against everything that has tried to end it. It should not work. By any reasonable assessment of the structural requirements for a functioning civilization of this scale and complexity, the Imperium of Man should not function. It does function, imperfectly and brutally and at extraordinary cost, and the fact that it does is either a testament to the resilience of the human species and the specific genius of the institutional design that the Emperor created, or it is evidence that the word function is doing more work in the sentence the Imperium functions than the word function is designed to do. Both are probably true. Close your eyes. The room is still quiet. Nothing outside is trying to get in right now. In the 41st millennium, on most worlds, on most nights, this is also true. The wars and the invasions and the demonic incursions and all the other categories of catastrophe that fill the records and the histories and the operational documents of the Imperium's many institutions are each individually the worst thing happening to whoever is experiencing them, and collectively, across 1,000,000 worlds, represent a level of ongoing catastrophe that the word catastrophe becomes inadequate to describe. But they are distributed. On any given night, the vast majority of worlds in the Imperium are not being invaded. The majority of people who live under the Imperium's banner will live their entire lives without directly experiencing any of the dramatic categories of threat that this account has been describing. This is not comfort, exactly. It is perspective. The person who lives and dies in a mid-hive hab on a world that is never directly touched by any of the great catastrophes of the age lives and dies in an Imperium that is paying for their safety with the things this account has described, and the account is accurate, and the person does not need to know the specifics of the payment to be the beneficiary of it. The 1,000 psykers per day, and the Grey Knights in the Eye of Terror, and the Sisters of Battle producing acts of faith at the cost of their own physiology, and the Navigator houses breeding their children toward the Warp Eye, and the Space Marines made from children in training facilities that do not discuss what they are doing. All of it is happening simultaneously and continuously, so that most people on most worlds on most nights can close their eyes and be safe. Most nights, most worlds, most people. The exceptions are the subject of this account, and the account is true, and the exceptions are important. They are important because they reveal what the Imperium actually is, rather than what it describes itself as being, and the difference between what the Imperium actually is and what it describes itself as being is the honest measure of what 10,000 years of survival at this cost produces in a civilization that was built on ideals it has never fully implemented. The Astronomican burns. It burns because 1,000 people are consumed by the machine that sustains it every day, and it has been burning for 10,000 years, and the ships that navigate by its light cross the void that would otherwise swallow them and arrive at the worlds they are traveling to, and disembark the people and the supplies and the forces that those worlds need to survive one more year. The light is real. The cost is real. Both of these things are true simultaneously. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, on 10,000 worlds tonight, ordinary people are going to sleep. Their hab units are sealed, and their children are in their cots, and the lumens are low, and the noise of the city is outside and muffled, and everything is as safe as it is going to be. They do not know what keeps them safe. They do not need to know. The knowing is for the people in this account, the people who pay the cost and who know what they are paying and who do it anyway, because the alternative is the one thing that cannot be allowed. Sleep now. The Astronomican burns. The custodians watch the throne. The space wolves are somewhere in the void doing what the space wolves do. The Grey Knights are in the places that do not appear on maps, doing what the Grey Knights do in the name of a secret that the Imperium is better served by not knowing. The watch is kept. The dark is held back for one more night. For the Emperor, for humanity, for the billion ordinary people on 1,000,000,000 ordinary worlds who are going to sleep right now in the quiet that all of this has purchased for them. Sleep now. We are watching. The Adeptus Mechanicus worships the Omnissiah. This is the name they give to the divine intelligence that they believe inhabits all machines, the machine god, whose will is expressed through the functioning of technology and whose favor is required for technology to function correctly. The Omnissiah theology is not compatible with the Ecclesiarchy's theology of the God Emperor in any straightforward sense, the two institutions having reached a concordat in the early millennia of the current age that allows them to coexist without resolving the theological contradiction, each institution maintaining its own framework and treating the concordat as sufficient basis for practical cooperation without the doctrinal reconciliation that genuine theological agreement would require. The consequence of the Omnissiah theology for the Imperium's technology base is the single most consequential institutional failure in the Imperium's history, a failure so comprehensive and so thoroughly built into the structure of how the Imperium manages technology that it cannot be separated from the Imperium's current technological state without dismantling and reconstructing the institution responsible for managing that state. The Mechanicus does not develop new technology, it maintains existing technology. These two activities are completely different, and the Mechanicus's theology makes clear that only the second of them is appropriate, because developing new technology implies that the knowledge of the Omnissiah can be extended through human inquiry, rather than recovered from the repositories of ancient understanding, where it waits to be rediscovered by sufficiently pious seekers. The standard template constructs are the central object of this theology, the legendary repositories of technology from the Dark Age of technology that the Mechanicus believes exist in sufficient number and sufficient completeness that, if they could all be recovered, they would provide the Imperium with the full technological suite of humanity's greatest era. Some STCs have been recovered. The instances of STC recovery are treated as among the most significant events in the Mechanicus's institutional history, the recovered templates representing a partial return of the lost knowledge that the Mechanicus's theology holds as the path to eventual technological completeness. The Mechanicus pursues STC recovery with the specific intensity of religious mission rather than the measured assessment of technological research, and this intensity produces both the extraordinary effort and the specific distortions that religious intensity always produces in the institutions it motivates. The technology that exists in the Imperium today is the technology that survived the Age of Strife and the Horus Heresy and 10,000 years of continuous warfare, and the Mechanicus's maintenance practices, minus everything that was lost to those events and their aftermath, and plus the relatively small additions that STC recoveries and carefully approved innovations have contributed in the intervening millennia. It is not advancing. The gap between what the Imperium's technology can do and what the technology of the Dark Age of technology could do is not closing. The Mechanicus's maintenance practices are sufficient to preserve most of what exists and insufficient to recover what was lost, and the theology that prohibits genuine research prevents the development of alternatives to the lost knowledge through any path other than its literal recovery from ancient repositories. The machine spirits that inhabit technology in the Mechanicus's theology are real in the specific sense that experienced Mechanicus practitioners have consistently observed behavioral characteristics in machines that are not explained by the machine's physical design alone, characteristics that vary between individual machines of the same type in ways that have no mechanical cause and that respond to the specific rituals of maintenance and communication that the Mechanicus employs in ways that the Mechanicus describes as the machine spirit responding to proper reverence, and that the more mechanistic analysts among the Adeptus Mechanicus's own ranks describe as characteristics of sufficiently complex machine systems in which subtle variations in component quality and assembly history produce divergent behavioral patterns that are real but that have mechanical rather than spiritual explanations. The Magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who have served longest, replace the most of themselves with mechanical components. This is not merely a cultural practice, not simply a preference for the mechanical over the biological that the Mechanicus's theology produces. It is an ongoing project of self-transformation that the most committed Magi pursue as a form of devotion, bringing themselves progressively closer to the pure machine existence that the Omnissiah represents, removing the biological components that the theology identifies as the most fallible and replacing them with mechanical equivalents that are more predictable and more controllable and more aligned with the nature of the divine machine. The Magi who have served longest have replaced so much of their biological substrate that the question of whether they are still human in any meaningful sense is one that the Orthodoxy's theology has a clear answer to, and that the Inquisition's xenobiologists consider somewhat more open than the Orthodoxy suggests. The Skitarii, The Mechanicus' military forces are manufactured soldiers in a sense that goes beyond the augmentation of the Space Marines. The Skitarii are human beings who have been modified so extensively that the human baseline they began from is no longer the primary description of what they are, their biological components reduced to the minimum necessary for the neurological functions that the Mechanicus values in them, while the rest of their physiology has been replaced with mechanical systems calibrated to military specifications. They do not retire. They do not have careers in the way that Imperial Guard soldiers have careers, with active service followed by some form of subsequent existence. They function in the military role for which they were produced until their components fail, at which point the components are assessed for replacement, or the system is decommissioned and the useful components are redistributed to other systems. The Skitarii understand their situation in the cases where the cognitive modifications they have undergone have left sufficient intact consciousness to understand anything through the theological framework of the Mechanicus, which provides a meaning for their existence that is specific and clear, and that the Mechanicus ensures its military servants have access to before, during, and for as long as their existence continues. Humanity is becoming more psychic. This is not a metaphor or a theoretical projection. It is an observable fact confirmed by the census data of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica over the past several centuries, data that shows a statistically significant increase in the proportion of human births that carry demonstrable psychic potential across every demographic category and every region of the Imperium for which the Telepathica has reliable data. The rate of increase is not dramatic on a generation-by-generation basis. It is unmistakable on a century-by-century basis. Humanity is, as a species, becoming more psychically active. The Emperor designed this, or created the conditions for it. The scholarly consensus among the restricted archives of the Inquisition's most senior scholars, those with access to the documents that bear on the question, is that the human psychic awakening is not an accident of evolution, but the continuation of a project that the Emperor initiated in the earliest days of his existence, a long-term program of directed human development whose endpoint was a humanity capable of naturally and stably managing its own psychic potential, no longer dependent on the throne and the Astronomican and the specific structural supports of the current Imperium, because the species itself would have developed to the point where those supports were no longer necessary. The problem is the timing. The project, if it is as the scholars assess it, was designed for a timeline that assumed the Emperor's direct guidance throughout the transition period, the period during which humanity's psychic awakening was producing more psykers per generation than the existing institutional infrastructure could safely manage, but during which those psykers had not yet developed the natural stability that the project's endpoint would provide. This transition period is when the Chaos Gods are most interested in human psykers, when the increase in psychically active humans provides more access points for warp influence and more potential worshippers and more conduits for demonic intrusion than the previous, less psychically active human population had provided. The Emperor's design presumably included a mechanism for managing this transition period. The Horus Heresy removed the Emperor from his design's management, and the mechanism for managing the transition period, if it existed, was not communicated to the institutions that would need to implement it. The Imperium is consequently experiencing the increase in human psychic activity without the management framework the increase was designed to be accompanied by, and the results are observable in the increasing frequency of unsanctioned psyker incidents across the Imperium, in the growing pressure on the black ships to collect a population that is growing faster than the collection infrastructure can manage, and in the specific threat environment that the Inquisition's trend analysis shows as a function of more psychically active humans, providing more opportunities for chaos corruption. The Rubicon Primaris event, the process by which existing Space Marines were converted to the Primaris standard using technology developed by Archmagos Belisarius Cawl under Guilliman's direction over the 10,000 years of the Regent's absence, is the most recent example of a development that has the specific quality of something designed before its time, something that answers a need that the current moment has, but that was prepared in a previous moment with knowledge of what the current moment would require. Carl spent 10,000 years preparing the Primaris technology. He began preparing it before the need for it was apparent to anyone else. Either he was extremely fortunate in his assessment of what 10,000 years would require, or he had access to information about what 10,000 years would produce that the conventional historical record does not account for. The Inquisition has asked this question. Carl's answers have been characteristically comprehensive in their technical detail and characteristically incomplete in their implications. Navigators describe the Astronomican as a lighthouse. This is the standard metaphor, and it captures the functional description accurately enough for practical purposes. What it does not capture is what the Astronomican actually looks and feels like to the trained psychic perception of a navigator whose warp eye is open in the warp. The brightness is the first and most overwhelming characteristic. The Astronomican is the single brightest psychic phenomenon in the galaxy, in the specific sense that its psychic output is concentrated and directed in a way that no other source in the galaxy matches, not the chaos gods in their domains, and not the great warp storms, and not the psychic pressure of the Eye of Terror. In the darkness of the warp, where everything has the specific quality of a medium that transmits psychic impressions rather than light, the Astronomican is a presence of such overwhelming intensity that the navigators who perceive it most directly at the closest range describe the experience as comparable to looking directly at a sun, a source of sensation so intense that it floods every other perception and requires the specific trained technique of experienced navigators to work with rather than simply be overwhelmed by. The warmth is the second characteristic. The Astronomican transmits what navigators describe as warmth, not temperature. The warp does not have temperature in the conventional sense, but a quality that maps onto the emotional register of warmth, of something benevolent and powerful, and oriented toward the guidance of those who look to it. This warmth is what navigators use to orient themselves relative to the Astronomican's direction. It is what allows them to find the specific angle and distance that navigation requires. It is what they describe in the informal accounts of their experience that circulate among navigator houses rather than in the official operational reports as the aspect of the Astronomican that is hardest to think about clearly, because the warmth is consistent with the theological description of the Emperor's care for his people in ways that make the navigator's perception of the Astronomican theologically interesting, and that the navigator house's culture has learned to treat as something not to examine too closely. The cost is perceptible. This is the fact that experienced navigators mention last in the informal accounts, the fact that the warmth and the brightness are accompanied by something else that they find the hardest to describe, something underneath the light, something that the light is produced by the consumption of. They do not describe this as pain exactly, because the perception of pain requires the perceiver to be in pain, and the Astronomican is not in pain in any sense that the navigator can directly perceive. But there is something in the quality of the Astronomican's psychic output that the most sensitive navigators describe as consistent with the experience of something that is being burned, that the brightness and the warmth are the output of a process that is consuming its fuel, and that the fuel is aware of what is happening to it in whatever sense the fuel is capable of awareness. The navigators who perceive this do not raise it in official reports. The information would not be actionable by the institutions that receive official reports. The navigator house's culture has developed over the many generations of navigators who have had this experience, an informal practice of acknowledging it among navigators without documenting it in any form that would require institutional response. The specific collective decision of a community that has decided that some truths are better held privately than expressed publicly, when the public expression would produce institutional consequences that would not help anyone. The Astronomican burns. The ships find their way. The Imperium endures 1,000 per day. You know all of this now. Or you know the version of it that this account has been able to convey, which is the distillation of 10,000 years of the most extraordinary and most disturbing facts about the universe of the 41st millennium into 2 hours of slow narration in a quiet room. The room is still quiet. Nothing outside is trying to get in. The lumens are low, and the sounds of whatever passes for night in your particular location are the ordinary sounds of an ordinary existence on a world that is not currently being invaded and has not been declared exterminatus and is not currently experiencing a demonic incursion or a Tyranid feeding, and whose psyker population is adequately managed and whose chaos cults have not yet grown to the point of open rebellion. This is the ordinary condition of most worlds in the Imperium on most nights, and it is purchased by everything this account has described, and the purchase is real, and the price is real, and both of those things are true simultaneously. The Astronomican burns. This is the central fact to carry away from 2 hours in the 41st millennium. The lighthouse burns. The ships find their way through the warp. The Imperium's million worlds remain imperfectly and brutally and at extraordinary cost connected. The cost of the connection is 1,000 per day, and the connection has been maintained for 10,000 years, and the machine that maintains it is broken in ways that cannot currently be repaired, and the question of what happens when it fails is one that the institutions responsible for managing it have not publicly answered, because answering it would require confronting a possibility that those institutions have not found a way to manage. But for tonight, it burns. And the Grey Knights are in their fortress monastery on Titan, which orbits Saturn in your solar system, training for the next time something comes through the eye of terror that requires them. And the Sisters of Battle are in their convents on 100 worlds, praying with the intensity that produces acts of faith and wearing the physical cost of that intensity in ways that the Medicae record and that the ecclesiarchy interprets as the marks of the Emperor's grace. And the Navigators are in their great houses, managing their lineages and training their young and looking at the warp through eyes that see more than anyone outside the houses knows. And the Steel Legion is on Armageddon, holding the watches on the walls above the ash wastes, with the names of the dead inscribed on every surface, and the amber sky turning above all of it. And the Emperor endures on his throne, in whatever condition 10,000 years of this kind of endurance produces, aware of everything and unable to speak, present and unable to act, sustaining the Astronomican with what remains of him, while 1,000 people per day are fed to the machine that sustains that sustaining. Close your eyes. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But right now, in this room, in this moment, there is quiet. There is the particular peace of having looked at something very dark and very true, and still being here, still breathing, still safe. The dark is the dark, and the facts are the facts, and neither of them requires you to be afraid of them right now in this room with the lumens low and the door sealed and everything outside exactly where it should be. The Astronomican burns. Sleep now. We are watching. Every psyker who is not collected by the black ships is a liability. This is the Adeptus Astra Telepathica's operational assessment, and it is accurate in the specific and verifiable sense that unsanctioned psykers who develop their abilities without the training and the null field management and the soul binding that the Telepathica's process provides, are statistically the single most common cause of localized warp incursions on hive worlds in the segmentum solar. The records the Inquisition maintains of warp incursions by cause list unsanctioned psyker activity as the leading factor in incursions below a certain scale, more common than deliberate chaos cult ritual, and more common than accidental warp exposure through damaged equipment. The specific process by which an unsanctioned psyker produces a warp incursion is called the flesh change in the informal terminology of the inquisitorial specialists who investigate the aftermath of these events. The term is borrowed from the Thousand Suns specific catastrophe, the rubric that Ahriman worked on his battle brothers to stop a similar process from destroying the Legion, but it applies in a looser sense to what happens to any psyker whose abilities develop faster than their natural or trained psychological defenses can contain them. The warp presses through the gap between the psyker's abilities and their defenses. The pressing produces in the psyker's physical form the mutations that the warp's energy causes in biological matter when it flows through it without the containment that trained shielding provides. The mutations are visible, they are often dramatic, and they attract the attention of the warp entities that track psychic energy, which increases the warp pressure through the psyker's body, which accelerates the mutation process and widens the gap between the warp and real space at the psyker's location, which can under sufficient conditions produce a full warp breach at that location. The cities and settlements where this process has run to its conclusion are the sites that the Inquisition's investigative teams find and document and classify. The classification includes the physical state of the location, which is typically a zone of psychic contamination centered on the point of breach, the specific form of contamination depending on which warp entities were attracted through the breach and what they did in real space before the breach was closed. The documentation is thorough, the locations are sealed and monitored, and in severe cases, subjected to containment bombardment to eliminate the specific psychic contamination that the breach left behind. The record of these locations is maintained in the Ordo Hereticus archives with the other records that describe things that have happened and that the Inquisition considers it useful to remember and important to not widely discuss. The psyker at the center of these events is not always dead by the time the investigation team arrives. This is the detail that the investigators find most difficult and that their training most specifically addresses. The being that the investigation team finds at the center of the contamination zone may still be recognizable as the person who began the process, a person who had a life and a name and relationships and some quality of inner experience before the flesh change began, wearing what remains of their humanity under the alterations that the warp's passage through them has produced. What to do with this being is a decision that the investigation team's inquisitor makes according to the protocols, and the protocols are clear, and the inquisitors who work these cases are trained to apply them without hesitation, because hesitation in this specific situation introduces a risk category that the protocols are designed to eliminate. The protocols are applied. The record is made. The investigation team moves to the next location. The Imperium's records contain categories of beings that appear in earlier historical documents and that do not appear in later ones in ways that the standard historical explanations for absence do not fully account for. The squats, also called the Leagues of Votan in more recent documentation, are the human subspecies that developed on high-gravity worlds near the galactic core over the long millennia of humanity's expansion, developing distinct physiological and cultural characteristics that marked them as distinct from baseline humanity in ways that the Imperium managed through the specific category of abhumans. They were part of the Imperium. They had their specific roles, and then, in the records of the late 41st millennium, they were not present in the same way. The historical documentation showing the specific pattern of an absence that the contemporary records do not directly address. The Tyranids consumed a significant portion of the squat worlds. This is the standard explanation, and it is supported by the operational records of the periods in which hive fleets passed through the galactic core regions where the squat worlds were concentrated. The Tyranid consumption of populated worlds is not unusual or undocumented. What is unusual is the specific completeness of the consumption, in this case, the degree to which a formerly significant population in the Imperium's records became absent from them in a way that other Tyranid consumption events have not produced for other populations. The Zoats are a different category of absence, beings that appear in the records of the Imperium's encounters with Tyranid-associated organisms and that subsequent records do not categorize consistently with their initial appearances. They are described in early encounter records as semi-intelligent beings associated with Tyranid fleets, but apparently capable of independent communication and of something approaching negotiation with imperial representatives, a category of behavior not typical of Tyranid organisms, and that the Ordo Xenos records note as anomalous at the time, and that subsequent Tyranid research has not been able to integrate into the understanding of the hive mind and its relationship with its component organisms that current doctrine is based on. The records contain other absences, species that are mentioned in Great Crusade-era documents as having been encountered and brought to compliance with the Imperium, and that do not appear in subsequent documents in ways consistent with continued existence. The specific fate of these species is not explained in the available records. The Inquisition's most thorough scholars have documented the absences without being able to fill them with explanation, noting them as questions for which the answers exist somewhere in the galaxy's history, but not in the parts of that history that are currently accessible. The Hrud are present in the records and are disturbing in a way that is different from the other threats in this account, because what the Hrud do is not violence in the conventional sense, but something that the xenobiologists describe as temporal decay, an entropy field that their presence generates in the space around them that accelerates the aging of matter and biological organisms within that field. The Space Marines who have engaged Hrud in combat report aging visibly during the engagement, their enhanced physiology providing some resistance but not immunity to the specific effect of fighting in proximity to beings whose presence accelerates time in their immediate vicinity. Vehicles corrode, organic matter decays. The accelerated entropy is reversible if exposure is brief enough, in the sense that the aging effect is real but can be partially compensated for by enhanced physiology and medical treatment. It is not reversible if exposure is prolonged, in the sense that a sufficiently long exposure produces aging effects that exceed any recovery mechanism available to the affected being. The records of the Hrud's presence on the worlds they inhabit show a specific archaeological signature, layers of material that have been aged beyond their actual temporal age by the accumulated entropy effect of Hrud habitation, artifacts that are physically ancient because the Hrud's presence made them physically ancient regardless of their actual age. The worlds the Hrud have inhabited for long periods are consequently worlds where the relationship between the age of artifacts and the actual history of their deposition is not what archaeology would normally suggest, a kind of geological record that the scholars who study it describe as the most unsettling evidence they have encountered of physics operating differently than physics is supposed to operate. The Adeptus Custodes are the Emperor's personal guard, the warriors created directly by the Emperor's own genetic craft, rather than from the gene seed of a Primarch, individually more capable than any Space Marine, and numbering only in the 10,000s rather than the hundreds of thousands. They have guarded the Emperor on his throne for 10,000 years. 10,000 years of watching a being who cannot speak to them, or acknowledge them, or give them the direct guidance that the service of a conscious commander would provide, guarding a being who is simultaneously the foundation of everything they are, and unable to perform any of the functions that the word foundation usually implies. The specific psychological reality of 10,000 years of this kind of service is something that the custodians do not discuss with outsiders, and that the outsiders who have tried to assess it have found largely inaccessible, the custodians' culture around discussing their internal experience being as impenetrable as their gold armor is to most weapons. What can be observed from the outside is that they changed during the 10,000 years in ways that the initial design of their institution did not anticipate, becoming more withdrawn from the wider Imperium and more focused on the throne and what surrounds it in ways that the observers who knew them before and after the heresy noted as significant. They have begun to emerge. In the current period of the 41st millennium, The custodians have started to be seen outside the Imperial Palace in numbers that had not been seen for millennia, the shield captain Trajan Valoris having determined that the threats of the current age are severe enough to warrant deploying the Emperor's Guard beyond the palace's walls in a way that the 9,000 years of their absence from the wider war had made seem unthinkable. This deployment is not costless. Each custodian who deploys to the wider galaxy is a custodian who is not guarding the throne, and the specific reasoning that led to deployment rather than continued vigil involves an assessment of the relative risks of the throne's defenses being depleted by external deployment versus the risks of the external threats being allowed to develop unchallenged. The assessment produced the deployment. The Inquisition is watching the assessment's consequences play out with the specific attention of an institution that knows what the assessment chose between. The custodians who have been guarding the throne for the longest periods, the ones whose service predates most of the institutions that currently exist in the Imperium, carry a quality of presence that is different from the newer custodians in ways that the observers who have been permitted to observe them note consistently. They are very still. Not the stillness of someone who has learned not to fidget, but the stillness of something that has been doing the same thing for so long that the background level of its attention has become calibrated to timescales that make human nervous activity appear as noise. They watch the throne with an attention that has been watching the throne for centuries, and the watching has produced in the watcher a specific quality that the word patience does not quite reach, something older than patience, something that has forgotten what impatience felt like. 1 million inhabited worlds, 1,000 psykers per day consumed by the Golden Throne, 10,000 years of the current age, 100 billion estimated human beings in the Imperium, though this estimate has an uncertainty range of several 100% in either direction. 800 Space Marine chapters, approximately, each of approximately 1,000 battle brothers, approximately 800,000 Space Marines total, protecting 100 billion humans across a million worlds in a galaxy that contains everything this account has described. 1 Space Marine per 125,000 people, if the Space Marines were evenly distributed, which they are not. Approximately 65 million years since the Necrons entered stasis. 10,000 years since the Horus Heresy. 5,000 years since the second founding that split the original legions into chapters. 112 years since the birth of the Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, the second great wound in reality that opened across the galaxy when the psychic pressure of the 41st millennium's accumulated violence reached a threshold that the fabric of space could not contain. The Great Rift is the fact that this account has not yet addressed, and that the current state of the Imperium cannot be accurately described without. When Abaddon the Despoiler launched the 13th Black Crusade from the Eye of Terror, the full weight of the forces he had been assembling across 10,000 years of preparation finally reached Cadia, the fortress world that had guarded the Eye of Terror's most stable exit point for millennia. And Cadia fell. The planet broke before the guard did. The geological destruction of Cadia's pylons, the devices that had been suppressing the Eye of Terror's expansion since their construction in the deep past, allowing the warp rift to expand in a cascade that spread across the galaxy in a wound that the Imperium named the Great Rift, and that the forces of chaos called the Cicatrix Maledictum, and that by either name cuts the galaxy in half along an irregular line from the Eye of Terror to the far edge of charted space. The Imperium Nihilus, the half of the Imperium on the far side of the Great Rift from Terra, cut off from the Astronomican by the warp storm that the rift created, cut off from regular communication and from the regular transit routes that connected it to the rest of the Imperium, isolated in ways that are not quite as total as isolation from the warp would imply, but that are severe enough to have changed the nature of existence for the worlds and the people in the Nihilus, in ways that the available reporting from those regions describes with a specificity that the editors of those reports have been careful about transmitting to the wider Imperium, because the specificity is disturbing in ways that the institutional managers of Imperium-wide morale have decided are not currently helpful. Guilliman is fighting the Indomitus Crusade. The Lord Commander of the Imperium, the Primarch, returned. is fighting the largest crusade since the Great Crusade itself, moving through the Imperium Nihilus and the Imperium Sanctus simultaneously through the organizational miracle of a crusade large enough to address both halves of a galaxy-spanning crisis. The miracle is real. The crusade is real. The specific constraints of time and distance and the sheer scale of what needs to be addressed are also real, and the gap between the miracle and the constraints is where the people of the Imperium currently live, in the space between what is being done and what needs to be done, which is where the people of the Imperium have always lived. The facts of the 41st millennium are the facts they are. They are disturbing because the 41st millennium is disturbing, because 10,000 years of the specific conditions that the Horus heresy created, and that nothing in the subsequent 10,000 years has been able to permanently resolve, have produced a civilization that is brutal and comprehensive and extraordinary, and that is paying for its own continued existence in ways that the people within it are not generally required to fully understand. But it endures. That is also a fact. Through everything this account has described, the Imperium endures. The Astronomican burns. The ships navigate. The worlds remain connected. Most of them, most of the time. The Space Marines hold their lines. The Steel Legion watches its walls. The Grey Knights do what the Grey Knights do. The Custodians watch the throne. The Navigator houses breed their children toward the warp eye. The Ecclesiarchy holds its services. The Mechanicus maintains its machines and its prayers. The Inquisition investigates and acts and manages the information environment with the specific ruthlessness of an institution that has decided that the Imperium's continued existence requires the management. And 1,000 people walk into the facility beneath the Imperial Palace every day. And the facility does what it does, and the Astronomican burns for another day. That is the 41st millennium. That is all of it, in summary. The disturbing and the enduring, together, inseparable, the one requiring the other, the price and the thing the price purchases, the darkness and the light it is paid for. Sleep now. The Astronomican burns. The watch is kept. The dark is held back for one more night, for the Emperor, for humanity, for the trillion ordinary souls who are sleeping right now across the million worlds of the Imperium, not knowing the cost of the quiet that surrounds them, safe in the specific and extraordinary way of things that are protected by something they cannot see, the light in the dark. Sleep.